Hello, everybody, and welcome back to yet another Crime Time with Connie. I'm your host, Connie, and welcome. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different. I wanted to do something reminding me of childhood. I don't know. I am going to do like a little deep dive into the show America's Most Wanted. I I would say that this show, besides Nancy Grace, is kind of like the first thing that got me started into crime at a young age. I remember when Nancy Grace covered the Lacey Peterson case. I was real little when that happened, but I just remember watching her and being like, oh my gosh, people do stuff like this. Like, I was so young, I couldn't really fathom the extent of what she was talking about. But every weekend, my dad would let us watch Cops. Cops would come on first, Saturday nights, because Friday nights we would go to Blockbuster and get a movie. Saturday nights was for Cops. Cops came on first, and then America's Most Wanted came on. It was only 30 minutes. I don't even think it was a full hour, but it scared me. I was like, oh my gosh, these are real people and they're dangerous. I remember a few cases. I tried to Google them to see if I could find the actual victims and the fugitives involved, but of course Google is like, what are you talking about? One I remember was a little girl who was abducted in Ohio, where I'm from, and I was terrified. I'm like, this man's gonna get me. But he took her, sexually assaulted her, and held her hostage, and she actually escaped. But she was around my age when I was watching it, so I was terrified. Another one was when a lady was abducted, and she was familiar with the area, so she would count every time they stopped at like a stop sign. So my little self is like, always watch your surroundings, make sure you know your left and right and all the stop signs. So I remember that. And then the lady who wrote on the napkin that she needed help at a rest stop, that was one I remember. And then I wish I knew the girl's name in this, but she was staying at a friend's house and she fell asleep on the couch, and there was a sliding glass door, and she's actually abducted. I remember following it, and she ended up being murdered and found, but her case was solved. And I wish I knew the name, but I do remember that going on when it was happening. It was a huge case, but that's one that I do remember watching. So I kind of wanted to know more a little bit about America's Most Wanted. Like, I knew John Walsh was the host of it. Of course, he has that distinctive voice, the leather jacket, and I just wanted to know how it came about. I covered the Springfield 3 case 2 videos ago, and they were talking about how a tip came in for America's Most Wanted, and I was like, how many cases out there was featured on America's Most Wanted? And I didn't realize how long it was on air. It started in 1988, and I was like, wow, that's a long time. But a few popular cases that was featured on America's Most Wanted: Natalee Holloway, Madeleine McCann, which is becoming popular now because of the DNA test, and the girl, I think it came up negative that she's not Madeleine. Elizabeth Smart. She was kidnapped from her bedroom. Man came in from her window, and a viewer of America's Most Wanted actually saw her with her kidnappers and phoned in the tip, and they actually captured him. So I do remember Elizabeth Smart's case going on. But those are high-profile cases that were featured on America's Most Wanted. And then Elizabeth Smart's case, which was actually solved, which is just great. So the show had a very successful rate, I guess. So the show actually aired on April 10th, 1988 for the first time, and it aired on the Fox network. It was the first public television series to ask the public's help in solving cold cases and locating fugitives. Also, the first TV series to work with police and law enforcement officials. Episodes would feature 5 to 8 cases with actor reenactments. And I actually do remember the actor reenactments, and this was a common theme with the show that people would actually mistake the actor for the actual fugitive. It did happen more than once, which I thought could actually happen because I thought it was real as a child. And it would actually include interviews with the families and the actual local police who worked on the case. Once the show did become popular, Walsh extended the show to help locate missing person cases. Now, the show was canceled for about a month and a half in 1996 due to production costs, but it did come back on air. So, like I said, the host was John Walsh, and he is a very known figure in the true crime world, and I always find his story fascinating because he was a parent of a child who was abducted and murdered, and him and his wife turned that grief into helping others, which I just find amazing. So John Walsh's son Adam, who was taken from him at 6 years old, him and his mom actually went to the mall on July 26, 1981, where he was abducted by Otis Toole, and he was sadly murdered and wasn't found for another 2 weeks, which I didn't know that. I always assumed Otis Toole was captured and caught immediately. He was a suspect, he was interviewed, even had pictures taken of his car where Adam's body was before he dumped it. Not his whole body, just his head. But actually, Otis Toole was never charged with the crime because by the time 2 decades later that they solved his case, because they already had the evidence they hadn't to charge him, he was already deceased. But he was in jail on other, of course he was in jail on other charges for horrendous crimes. And another suspect in Adam's case was Jeffrey Dahmer. I never knew that. That is just bizarre because Jeffrey was living in Florida around the same area, and a few witnesses described someone as Jeffrey with a little boy. They actually went up to Milwaukee and interviewed Jeffrey, and he said that he is not a pedophile, which is not true because I think 2 of his victims were teenage boys, which classifies you as a pedophile, but not according to Jeffrey Dahmer, because 6 years old is just a little bit too young for him. John and his wife decided to try to prevent this to another family where their child is abducted and murdered. So they actually created the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which is a huge nonprofit organization that still exists today that helps families in cases like this and tries to prevent them. But John says in interviews that he owes all of it to his wife for the creation of it, because while he was struck with grief, she was the one answering I don't want to say fan letters, but like families that would write to them about that they were in similar situations. And she was, as a mother, when you lose a child, you don't want that to happen to someone else. So she really was the rock in their family, John says, and actually started the whole thing, which is very fascinating, and it has helped a lot of families. When the show was created, actually John wasn't the original choice to host the show. There was many actors that were up to play the show, that were up to host the show, and there was an author up to host the show. But they wanted John to do it. Around the time that they're creating it, John was doing a lot of traveling for what him and his wife created. The first solved crime on America's Most Wanted, the very first episode that featured this fugitive, was actually caught 4 days later. With over 1,000 tips called in, it was over the fugitive David James Robert. In 1974, he committed rape, murder, and arson. He actually set a house on fire with the couple and their 3-year-old toddler inside, which is it's horrible. And just only 4 days later, after his profile was shown on the show, he was caught. The next one it's just so bizarre to me. Someone actually called in on himself. So Kevin Fuller called himself in, which was a very unusual tip. Tried to explain that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. He was arrested for bank robbery and broke out of a medium security faculty. He said he only escaped because he felt like the medical staff was not attending to his medical needs. But no one really believes him, because while he was out, when he escaped, after he escaped, he actually strangled a bus driver and robbed a convenience store and robbed a bank. Another successful case that was featured on this show was of the fugitive Lee Neal Carter, which was the fastest turnaround of any criminal added to the FBI's Most Wanted list and America's Most Wanted. So the episode that showed his profile, of course, aired at 8 p.m. The FBI put him on the Most Wanted list at 9, and he was in custody by 11 p.m. And his crime was committing a shooting spree, kind of like a love interest conversation gone wrong, where he murdered one and 2 people were injured. This one's just bizarre to me. So John Walsh goes and eats at a cafe in Florida. He's having a great time. He orders steak. Nothing, just having a grand old time. And that's when he discovers, I think a week later, that the cook who actually cooked his steak for him was a fugitive that was featured on America's Most Wanted and was actually caught later. Of course, this person's name was Asghar Ali, which was the fugitive, and he was under a different alias, of course. But that's just crazy. You can't make that one up. Like, that one just blows my mind. In a very popular case, the Texas 7 of the 7 men who escaped to the prison in Texas, obviously that's where they get their name from, and was on the run for a little bit. They were featured on the show. Their episode aired on January 20th, 2001, and they were caught on the 23rd, so only 3 days later. And this one I recently actually saw, I think, a TikTok of, or like a reel. I think it was the Howard Stern TikTok or reel Instagram, one of the two. But they had their guest Dave Navarro on, which I've known about Dave for forever. Of course, he was married to Carmen Electra, but he was actually a guitarist for Red Hot Chili Peppers for, I think, just one album, and actually Jane's Addiction. I know him the most from Ink Master. He's the host of it, and he's also an actor. He's been on a couple guest starring episodes. But actually, his mother, Constance, who went by Connie Hopkins, was actually murdered by her ex-boyfriend. Thought I had the date wrong. So she was murdered with her close friend. I think he described her more as an aunt to him in 1993. And he was on the run for a little bit. But Dave, in this clip, was talking about how his parents were divorced and he was just 15 years old. And it was a Thursday. No. Yes, it was a Thursday. And he was actually supposed to be at his dad's house on Wednesday, but his dad was busy or something. Their schedule didn't work out, so he just said come the next day. And Dave said that he was at his dad's house when he wasn't supposed to be, when his mom and her friend was murdered. And he always felt like if he was there, he would have been murdered too. His profile was featured on the show, and he was actually caught and charged. The show almost actually helped apprehend Gianni Versace's killer 4 days before his murder. I actually watched Ryan Murphy's his take on Gianni Versace's murder for, what is it, America's Crime Story on FX. I actually liked it. I know there's been some issues with some facts about it, but that was a really good watch. Actually, some parts I was like, I don't know if I can watch it. I also watched the OJ one, which I think I finished the OJ one. I don't think I finished the Versace one, actually. It was good. Darren Cross was really good in it. But if you remember watching the show, actually John Walsh featured his own fugitives that he thought should be on the FBI's most wanted list, and he would actually have this segment be called Dirty Dozen. Sorry, America's Most Wanted Dirty Dozen. So since this was the longest series FX has ever had in history, I still think to this day, it has actually caught 17 of the top 10 of the FBI's America's Most Wanted, which is just crazy. That's a lot. With more than 1,000 fugitives captured, I think the exact amount is 1,202, but I've seen different numbers, but that is the highest that I've seen, and has helped bring home 60 missing children. But when the show actually first aired, they didn't get a lot of support from the American Civil Liberties Union, which was funded in 1920 by, I know, Helen Keller and Jane Addams, which is huge activists, and they actually helped funded this, which it's essentially our nation's guardian of liberty. The reason why they kind of had an issue with the show at first is that they felt like if a fugitive was featured on the show, that they would not get a fair trial when they were caught, which I can agree with. I mean, the media has always played a part in if people have got a fair trial. I mean, Scott Peterson is one of them. A lot of people think he did not get a fair trial because of the media, which is just a whole other conversation. Because of this, Walsh ended each episode with the reminder that the suspects featured were innocent until proven guilty, and to make sure the show uses terms like allegedly and reportedly when discussing suspects who have not been convicted. Which whenever you do talk about someone who has not been convicted, proven guilty, and whatever, that you should use allegedly and reportedly, because there is a chance they could be innocent. And that's why I don't like to mention like some names when I'm discussing cases, because I'll refer to them as the boyfriend or the friend. And I know people want as many as details, but I just feel like it'd be better to refer them as the friend or the boyfriend, because they have not been charged. If they were charged, I probably would say their name. Yeah, America's Most Wanted did a lot, and it was actually canceled in 2011. There was a few reboots. I don't know if it's currently on air. I saw that they did bring it back. I don't know if it was canceled or not. think that was like 2020, 2021. I always watched it as a kid, and actually my dad, when my dad was in Iraq, my grandma had to come watch us from New York because my mom's deceased, so someone had to watch us kids. And I was in 3rd grade, and I was obsessed with anything crime. I blame my grandma too. She watched all them Lifetime movies, and it's all crime. But in 3rd grade, we actually had to do a little project, I guess. It was teach your classmates something. So, like, how to brush your teeth, how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And I was like, I don't want to do any of that. I actually cut out pictures of missing children from like the newspaper, and I had like a little profile book, and I taught self-defense. You know, the scene in Miss Congeniality where Sandra Bullock, she does the groin and the elbow and the nose. I actually did that. I mean, I didn't hurt anybody, but then I did, if someone's choking you and you flip them like Gracie Hart did, that's what I did in 3rd grade. But yeah, I'm super proud of that. My grandma also got me an investigation kit. Remember the Scholastic Book Fair? I would never get anything, but grandma came, and of course I was allowed to get something. But you would have a catalog too, kinda like a newspaper catalog, and you can order stuff. And she actually got me like the milk carton that looks like a camera, and like the lipstick that was the microphone, and the caution tape, like I need caution tape, which I actually did use. I was at my friend Allie's house, and we said Pennywise was living in the cellar, the sewer, and we got a finger, I had my little tongs, and I got a fingernail and put it in my evidence bag. Anywho, that is kind of what I found out about America's Most Wanted. But yeah, I just wanted to do something lighter. It's Easter week, so I have a lot going on with my kids, and just wanted to do a fun episode, I guess. Not really fun, some heavy stuff in it. But I hope you guys have a great holiday weekend if you celebrate, or just get time off. My husband gets 4 days off, which is great. And yeah, I have a special announcement next week, so stay tuned for that. Once you hear it, you'll be like, oh, that makes sense. That is it for today. Let me know if you guys watched America's Most Wanted, or if you remember something. Hope you guys have a great weekend, and I will see you guys soon.